The snow along our block had the rough look of a week-old haircut. Chicago wind pushed it into ragged ramps against curbs and porches, and the streetlights made it glitter like it wanted to be beautiful for someone who would not thank it. I walked up the front steps with a grocery bag balanced on my forearm and the kind of fatigue that turns a man quiet. The key slid into the deadbolt with a steady scrape I know better than the sound of my own voice. The house breathed out warm air and a familiar scent from the vent above the hall table. Cinnamon and soap. Home with its shoulders set and its rules clear. I set the bag down and listened. It is a habit from work and from life. Fans hum. Pipes tick. A television whispers even when muted. Silence has a shape. Tonight, the shape in our living room looked like a body that had just remembered how to stand. The couch cushion wore a deeper crease than it should have, and the throw blanket ran diagonal instead of straight. In the kitchen, the fruit bowl held everything but the last apple I had left that morning. There was a second coffee cup drying beside the sink, with a faint lipstick ring pressed against the curve. The color did not belong to my wife. I am Ethan. I write security rules that point out bad habits in software before bad habits grow teeth. At work, we call it threat modeling. In a marriage, the phrase sounds cruel, but patterns are patterns. My wife is Lena. We met at a charity 5K when my knees still believed they were immortal. She laughed like someone who had never been shushed, and I thought that meant she was brave. Maybe it still does. Some kinds of courage are just hunger taught to smile. I carried the groceries to the counter and arranged them as if alignment could change fate. I wiped the sink edge with my sleeve out of habit and felt grit catch my cuff, not dirt, powder. Gym chalk rides home on hands that pretended they were only helping a client adjust form. A day earlier, that same chalk had dusted the front seat of my car after Lena borrowed it for a quick errand. I had not commented. I have learned that good notes can outrun a loud voice. Our son was at a sleepover with cousins in Oak Park, which meant the house had room for a kind of silence that adults create when the truth is not ready to leave its room. I walked to the hallway where we hang coats. 2 hangers jammed together. 1 heavy wool that smells like cold air and coffee. 1 light nylon that smells like someone who walked out of a bar through a kitchen door. I stood and let the air move across my face, and I told myself a story about clients and lateness, and how the city sometimes shrugs us apart without meaning to. There is a separate kind of story I had not allowed. The one where my best friend had keys to my house and used them. His name is Mark. We grew up in neighboring buildings that hated their boilers equally. We played ball on cracked courts and learned how to borrow time from the long November afternoons that felt like they would never let night arrive. He has the laugh of a man who believes he can talk a stop sign into letting him go first. He sells things for a drug company now, and he does it well enough that his travel bag costs more than my first 2 cars together. I have defended him to other men because loyalty is a habit I wanted to keep. The doorbell camera saves a clip each time it hears feet and a knuckle. That week, the day before the couch crease deepened, it recorded a figure with Mark height and Mark jacket dropping a small package at our door and texting Lena to say delivery. He had learned the camera angle by now. A half step back and a turn at the waist keeps the profile from being obvious. What he had not learned were the ways houses remember everything. The back latch likes to stick unless you lift and pull toward you with a small twist. The sound is a soft metal whine. It appeared again in a midnight recording on a night when the gate was supposed to be locked. Our gate tells me who respects it and who expects it to submit. You might ask why I did not call Mark right then and lay out my evidence like cards. Because I have been in rooms where 2 people shouted and no one won. Because I have a child who needs sleep and a mortgage that appreciates men who count to 10 before they speak. Because the only revenge that lasts is the kind that holds the roof up and keeps the heat paid and teaches a boy that his father can step around a fire without tripping. I started a new timeline. Work makes me good at that. I wrote down the night I came home late from a system change and found Lena showered with the radio on a station she never listens to. I wrote down the afternoon Mark texted to say he would swing by to pick up a wrench, though he and I both know he does not fix his own things. I saved a photo from a group night out because the white wall behind them had a clock that told me exactly when the picture had been taken, not when Lena posted it. She claimed it was from days earlier. The small clock hands disagreed, and I trust hands that have no reason to lie. I checked our credit card portal for charges that did not know how to edit themselves. My job gave me instincts that do not apologize for being nosy. A hotel lounge downtown that Lena would call tacky if asked on a calm day. A rideshare charge from a side street near Mark apartment at 2 a.m. A purchase for a jersey from a team neither of us follows. Size large. Shipped to a locker service in a building that rises from a block where Mark parks when he wants to walk without being seen. All of these are circumstantial unless you have the patience to let time add one more brick each day. I had patience. I do not have many talents, but I have that. Lena told me she had a late meeting with a vendor for the gym. She returned with the kind of laugh a person brings home when they believed a bouncer liked them. She leaned into the counter and asked why I was making pasta so late, and brushed my shoulder with a softness she uses when she cannot decide whether to love me or keep me on the hook. I listened to her talk about a new class idea that would bring influencers to the studio and let them post in front of a wall of plants. I told her it sounded like a plan. Plans can be both good and ugly at the same time. That is not a paradox. It is just math with hearts. Mark texted me an article about a boxing match and asked if I wanted to meet for wings at the bar where we used to complain about money we did not have. I said I needed an early night because our son had a field trip at dawn. He replied with a thumbs up that looked more like a door closing than a friend being nice. In the past, we would have argued about a time or about which bar had the better fries. Silence now filled spaces where comfort used to live. I added that to the timeline too. Absence is a datum. The gym held a weekend challenge. Lena asked me to help check in participants and to carry a box of branded towels to the table with the clipboard. The box smelled like cotton and the optimism of people who believe sweat can be transformed into a story. Mark stopped by during the second heat to drop off coffee for the staff. He looked like the kind of man who has found his reflection useful in the last year. He hugged Lena too long in front of 3 witnesses who had their own bodies to worry about, and he clapped me on the shoulder like a coach trying to distract a player who has started to figure out the playbook. I smiled and offered to run to the store for more ice. He said he would do it. He always likes to volunteer for tasks that keep him useful but not visible. I let him. On Monday, HR at Mark Company sent a quarterly reminder about the fraternization policy and expense reports after a splashy scandal in another division. He forwarded it to our group chat with a joke that tried to sound like boredom and landed like fear. I kept the email. Not because I love paperwork, though sometimes I think I do. Because companies are slow but not stupid. And when their rules wake up, they like to stretch their legs. If a man is sleeping on a train track, sometimes the whistle is not for him, but the outcome will be the same. I scheduled a consult with a family lawyer named Kayla. Her office smelled like printer heat and peppermint. She asked me to speak in nouns and dates. I gave her nouns. Lena, Mark, rideshare, hotel, doorbell, schedule. I gave her dates. She told me to stop at the line where feeling starts. She said we would stage this as a request for temporary orders, protecting the house and the accounts, and a parenting plan for the next 3 months. She suggested a financial restraining order to keep significant transfers from leaving quick. She suggested we send a preservation notice to both the gym and Mark Company to retain messages and logs related to a romantic relationship overlapping with work or expense charges that smell like date nights. She said we would not be dramatic. We would be thorough. I realized that thoroughness is my favorite genre of revenge. I returned home with a folder and put it under the cookie tin that Lena never touches because she believes sugar belongs to other people. I cooked dinner and set 2 plates and listened to her talk about some couple who got engaged on a treadmill because they had met at the gym. She shook her head at the need people have to make the whole city watch their happiness. She used a fork like a baton while she talked. I counted the taps on the plate. The rhythm was off. Rhythm tells the truth more often than words do. That week, our son lost a tooth, and Lena cried because she is soft toward milestones and always will be. Mark texted to say he would stop by with a small model engine for the boy because he had always wanted one as a kid and never got it. He arrived with the box like a knight bringing an offering to a gate he wanted opened. He stayed 5 minutes too long. He made a joke about the spaghetti I had cooked and said his mother added sugar to hers, and that is why men who grew up in our buildings crave sweetness. He looked at Lena when he said sweetness. She looked at the floor where the scratch from moving furniture years ago maps a path I ignore out of stubbornness. She smiled at that scratch like it was a secret. I try not to be cruel in memory. People are complicated, and my friend has been my friend through hard winters and a funeral and a night when I needed to move. And he showed up with a truck and money for gas. He also chose to stand behind my back in my kitchen in a way that made me feel like a man who had forgotten his coat during a storm. Both truths are true. One truth was heavier. I did not leave. I did not punch. I did not post. I waited and made copies. The doorbell camera angle shifts if you nudge the bracket accidentally with your knuckle when you reach for the doorbell. The bracket had not shifted for months. Now it often did, by a careful 1.5 inches that hides a face while still hitting the button. The cleaning lady who comes once a month has never touched the bracket. My bracket does not move itself. The thermostat shows small spikes whenever someone showers. The spikes appeared on 2 Tuesday afternoons when Lena scheduled a meeting called Team Run in her calendar. She does not run at 2. She runs at 6. The timeline grew a spine. I asked Kayla about serving papers at home or work. She suggested work only if necessary. She suggested we aim for private dignity because judges remember who chose to keep the splash from tearing other people's clothes. I asked about Mark. She said we are not suing Mark. We are drawing a boundary around my house and my account and my schedule and my child. She said if Mark has committed expense report fraud, it is his employer problem and not the court problem. But she would not discourage me from responding to any ethics hotline request with facts if asked. She smiled with the tired kindness of a person who has built many small bridges for strangers and watched some of them use those bridges to run back into fires anyway. Lena wanted a weekend away. She proposed a wellness hotel with salt rooms and a pool modeled after a spring in a city none of us have ever been to. I agreed and said we would go the following month because I had a release weekend with a client. She dropped the idea so fast that Desire should have sued her for abandonment. She went to dinner with friends that night, with a dress that likes cameras and a smile that likes applause. Mark posted a story from a table at a restaurant across town and forgot that mirrors reflect everything. A woman leaned into the glass with a phone and a laugh. You could not see her face, but you could see the bracelet with the tiny black stone that Lena bought after a week of telling me she could not decide between 2 art prints because money was tight. She had chosen. People tell you that lashing out feels good. They forget what comes next. The night after the bracelet appeared in the mirror, I slept hard, and when I woke, I felt clean in a way that surprised me. Clarity is not triumph. It is the removal of itch. I made breakfast and poured coffee and wrote our son's lunch note with a silly drawing that made him laugh when he pulled it out in the cafeteria. I kissed his forehead as he rushed to the door with a backpack that weighs more than the moon. I pressed my palm to the door frame after the house went quiet, and I told it I would do right by it. I packed a folder with copies and a calendar with times and a list of numbers. I emailed the gym owner with a polite notice that counsel may request records about a potential conflict of interest. I emailed Mark Company Ethics Line with a general inquiry about expense report procedures and third-party spending for non-work companions. With no names attached, only times. I am an engineer. I do not trust miracles. I trust systems, and I had begun to lean on the ones that exist for moments exactly like this. Kayla filed our petition for temporary orders on a Wednesday morning when the sky sat gray, like a tired promise. The court stamped a date for a hearing and sent instructions about decorum. Kayla asked for an agreement to keep the house payments current and to limit any unusual withdrawals. She asked for a schedule that keeps our son stable. She noted my willingness for fair division and my unwillingness to pay for a relationship that was not mine. She included a line that sounds like steel. Both parties shall refrain from introducing romantic partners to the child while this case is pending. The page did not clap. It did not need to. On Friday, I told Lena I would take our son to his cousins and stop by the market after. I asked if she wanted anything. She asked for candles and a specific brand of yogurt that she buys when she is trying to feel like a person who does not need sleep. I brought both. The house smelled like the inside of a store that sells calm. Mark texted me that he had an extra ticket to a game that night and he would leave it under my name at will call. I said work had eaten me. He responded with a skull emoji that played at gallows humor. A minute later, a burst of laughter echoed faintly in our hallway as a car idled outside. It sounded like my best friend pretending to be my best friend. On Sunday morning, I drove past the studio and watched people line up for a class. Lena stood at the front desk in a sweatshirt with sleeves pushed to her elbows and talked to a man with a clipboard and a shaved head. Mornings like this used to make me proud in the simple way that is worth more than furniture. I parked and walked around the block and looked at the reflection of the front desk through the window of the coffee shop across the street. I do not love surveillance. I love not being the only person depending on me in a room where everyone else is lying. The clipboard man slid a small envelope across to Lena, who tucked it under the counter with movements a magician would approve. I ordered a coffee to pay my rent for the view. The coffee tasted like a minor key. 2 days later, the process server delivered one set of papers to our house while our son was at school, and a second set to Mark after a compliance meeting about travel budgets. The server is a man who understands tone. He does not smile or sneer. He makes the handoff as if he were passing a wrench to a mechanic. Simple tool, necessary task, no drama required. Lena called my name from the door. She used my full name like I was a child who had spilled paint on a couch. She asked if I had lost my mind. I told her paperwork is the opposite of madness. Paperwork is a line on a map, so both drivers know which lane they should be in. She laughed in short bursts and slammed the bedroom door. The slam failed to feel like victory for either of us. I sent a calm text telling her our son would sleep at my mother's that night, so we could talk without him hearing adult weather. She replied that she would be working late and not to wait up. At midnight, the doorbell saved a clip of a person with marked jacket pressing his shoulder close to the doorframe to hide from the fisheye, and then leaning in to whisper toward the seam where the weather stripping surrenders. The mic picked up only 2 words. You safe. I invested those 2 words into a fund that would pay out later in a way I could use. I met Kayla at her office with a stack of clips, printouts, and 2 pages of timeline entries written in short lines as if I was building a bridge with tiny planks. She smiled at my stubbornness and sorted my stack into 3 piles. Timeline, finance, work. She asked how I felt, and then waved her hand and said, feeling could wait. She outlined our hearing strategy. Lead with stability. Emphasize our son's schedule. Ask for temporary financial restraint above a threshold. Note the possibility of a workplace policy issue squarely without cheering. Judges like adults who talk about rules without pretending to be their authors. We would be those adults. The night before the hearing, Mark sent me a long message. The sentences wore sweat. He had been my brother, and I was being cold. He was lonely and overwhelmed, and Lena had been a light in a year that had eaten him. He insisted nothing started until I had pulled away emotionally. He insisted we could all talk like family and find a way to be modern about this. He did not mean modern. He meant convenient for him. I did not respond. The next morning, he texted a single word. Sorry. I forwarded the thread to Kayla. Silence is not weakness. It is an archive waiting for the right room. The hearing felt like waiting your turn at the DMV, except the chairs cost more, and the stakes would make anyone sweat under a decent suit. The judge had a face that looks like a choice. She listened to Kayla with the patience of a person who understands the weather has laws. She listened to Lena attorney read a paragraph about feelings and growth. The judge cut gently and asked for dates and accounts and proposed schedules. She granted temporary exclusive use of the house to me and set a schedule for our son that made sense with school and bedtime and the bus line. She ordered both parties to refrain from large withdrawals without notice. She suggested we think about mediation, and she set a date. Her stamp sounded like a nail-finding wood that wanted to hold. Lena looked at me outside the courtroom and asked whether I was happy. I told her happiness was the wrong metric. Safety was closer. She told me I had ruined our friendship group. I told her I had refused to host her affair at my expense. She told me that men always build big fences when small gates would do. I told her the fence was for the kid. She told me to stop making our son a shield. I told her I was building him a roof. A man can do worse than that in a crisis. She left with a walk that had learned to be angry. I stood still for a moment until my breathing remembered its instructions. News moved through our friends like a rumor in a school hallway. 2 peeled off to stay with Lena full-time. 1 tried to split his weekends like a county map. 1 texted me that he loved me and could not choose sides, and then chose a side while typing. I did not argue. I accepted the cost. Old songs do not play the same after a speaker blows. You can pretend you like the distortion. You can also save up for a new speaker and play something else. Compliance at Mark office called me with a list of questions about specific dates. They had received my anonymous inquiry and additional reports that aligned with it. They wanted to clarify hotel charges and meal receipts that had been classified as client engagement, but were unaccompanied by any logged meetings. They asked if I was willing to provide copies of public posts that could establish location and time. I sent them 3 screenshots with timestamps and a note reminding them that I was not an aggrieved employee or rival. I was a spouse who preferred quiet process to explosive noise. The investigator thanked me in the tone of a person who has been force-fed tantrums for a living, and finally met a vegetable. Weeks passed differently after a hearing. The house learns the new schedule quickly. I clean the hallway closet and throw out a stack of tote bags that never told any truth other than the lie that they would save me from needing more drawers. I install a small safe for documents and add the birth certificates and passports and a handwritten inventory, so future me can find things without panic. I label files from Kayla office in a way that would make my old coach proud. I convert anger into small, neat tasks and then into rest. I run again on the weekends and remember the rhythm of breathing when the lake wind tries to argue with your chest. I sleep enough to think clearly, and I refuse to argue after 10 at night because adults need thresholds. Lena alternates between apology and accusation. On school mornings, she brings our son back on time, and the 3 of us perform a quiet exchange of a backpack and a lunchbox. She does not try to come inside. She does not talk about Mark in front of the child. She shakes when she thinks I am not looking. I would be lying if I said I like that. I would also be lying if I said I enjoy it. Suffering does not taste like victory. It tastes like metal. I prefer bread. Mediation arrives in a room that has a fake plant that has never fooled anyone. The mediator speaks in gentle commands and writes on a pad like he hopes the paper will behave. Kayla explains our requests again. House for stability this year. Account transparency. A formula for support based on actual numbers rather than aspiration. An agreement that neither of us will introduce anyone to our son until a future date approved by a therapist. Lena counselor pushes back on the timeline and asks for flexibility. Kayla keeps her verbs short. The mediator looks relieved each time she speaks. We break for water. I count to 10 because counting is cheap and works. Compliance reaches its conclusion 1 week after mediation. Mark takes a leave but is called something else in the email. He resigns to pursue opportunities closer to home. The letter does not mention the part where his corporate card bought 2 dinners for 2 at a place that lists menu prices as market because the chef never learned to type numbers. The letter does not mention hotel receipts that align with nights Lena told me she fell asleep at the studio. The letter does not mention the grant of my request for expense report detail because that is not public. But the letter does exactly enough. He calls me that night to tell me he hates me. He says I ruined his life. He says he was trying to be happy with someone who actually saw him. I want to ask what he thinks seeing is, but I do not offer him that conversation. I hang up after telling him to stop calling my number. I send the number to Kayla with a note. No response required. The divorce becomes a matter of lists. I list furniture and books and the console under the TV that we both pretend is not a stage. I list bank accounts and the sum needed to keep the house alive for 12 months. I list times and school commitments and soccer games. I list holidays like a man mapping land he does not own. The judge appreciates the lists more than the speeches. The judge smiles when I bring a calendar printout with colored blocks that match sleep and pickups and returns and bedtimes. The judge asks if I will hold to this plan while the lawyers finish their dance. I say yes. Lena says yes. The judge stamps the paper again, and the stamp sounds like a plane landing on time. Friends ask if I miss my best friend. I miss what we were. I do not miss who he became when the room decided it wanted to clap for him, and he thought applause meant immunity. He sends a letter a month later saying he is in therapy and learning about boundaries. He says he hopes we can one day sit down and talk about the history we have. I send a card that says, I wish him health. That is all the history gets. I am not a museum. You want a big ending because that is what most stories taught you. A scene where I stand in a bar and tell the whole place the truth until even the glasses are crying. A scene where Lena begs in the snow and I walk away like a man in a movie who believes his boots survived winter because the soundtrack was kind. I do not have that ending. I have a kitchen where the kettle remembers the exact moment to sing because I taught it. I have a front porch that knows my step. I have a son who tells me on a Tuesday that he likes how I cut apples because he never gets seeds. I have a lawyer who tells me calm was my best weapon and then laughs because weapon is the wrong word for the skill to hold paper straight. On the day the decree comes through with the court seal and the terms that we bartered over, I sit in my car for a minute and let the heater do its work. The foam bead that has cracked on the steering wheel presses into my palm like a small reminder that things age and function anyway. I drive to pick up my son. The school hallway has the smell every hallway has in winter. Wet boots and pencil shavings and oranges. He runs out and flings himself into me and asks if we can make a fort tonight. I say yes. We go home and use every pillow and blanket, and we build something that does not have to last to be worth the effort. He falls asleep inside with a book balanced on his chest, and that is as close to triumph as any man deserves. Months later, the house knows how to be my house. The walls have stopped listening for footsteps that do not belong to the people who live here. The doorbell camera quietly eats clips of squirrels and deliveries that bring toothpaste and socks. The bracket no longer shifts. I run in the mornings with layers that make me look like a man who takes weather personally. I see a counselor once a month and do not pretend I am above that. I call my mother more, and I let her talk as long as she wants. I fix the loose tile in the bathroom that Lena always said she could live with because she did not love grout. I love grout now. I love anything that fills gaps and stays. Mark texts me a photo of a lake at sunrise with no comment, and I do not reply. Lena sends a message about a new class at her gym and a schedule change for next term, and I reply politely with the adjustments. We exchange our sun on time. We do not talk about the past. We do not make plans. We are two people who built a house together and then built separate paths away from it because no other path could be trusted. Sometimes that is the most adult outcome available. I keep the folder from Kayla in the safe. I do not open it. The story inside is written in a font that does not need to be read twice. I keep the timelines in a drawer because the mind loves to erase edges when you start to feel better. I do not want to hate anyone. I do not want to rewrite anything. I want to remember just enough to avoid the same corner next time. That is what healing means to me. Not amnesia, orientation. Summer warms the rails, and the city smells like a bakery without a budget. My son learns to ride a bike. He falls and scrapes his knee, and he looks up at me like a judge deciding a case. I tell him he can cry, and that does not make the scrape larger. He cries, and then he rides again. We go to a game and eat food that will shorten our lives by a day in exchange for a memory that lasts longer. We walk home when the crowd still wants to stay, and I tell him that leaving early sometimes guarantees a seat on the train. He nods with the wisdom of 8-year-olds who have learned that a seat can feel like a throne if your legs are tired. There are nights when the house sounds like a museum, and I want to fill it with noise. I turn on a record and stand in the kitchen and cut garlic and listen to the gentle beat of oil in the pan. And I let that be the company I need. There are afternoons when work is loud, and I open the window and let in the sound of a city that does not care about my problems. There are mornings when I wake and do not think about Lena or Mark for 3 full hours, and I consider that a medal. On those mornings, I send a quiet thank you to the version of me who chose paper instead of fire. I learned something I did not expect. Dignity is not a prize. It is a tool. It is the thing you pick up when your hands are shaking, because it is easier to hold than rage. It is the thing you use to build a schedule that keeps kids fed and lights paid and breath steady. It is the thing that convinces courts and clerks and bank managers that you will do what you say. It is the thing that lets you look at a man who used to be your best friend and wish him health without wishing him home. I lift that tool every day now. It is heavy sometimes. My hands are stronger than they were. That counts for something. If anyone is still waiting for spectacle, for the moment where the apartment lobby sees a process server in a trench coat like a detective in a film, know this: the only theater I produced happened when a judge stamped a page and I did not faint. The only applause belonged to the sound my son makes when he finally ties his shoes without help. The only curtain dropping was the garage door at night with a healthy motor that I finally freed from grit and neglect. That was my quiet standing ovation. That and a house that does not tilt when the wind gets ideas. I thought my best friend would be the hardest part to lose. He was not. Habits were harder. The habit of sending him a link to a bad movie trailer and waiting for his insult. the habit of expecting his face on the first warm day when we played on the old court and pretended the nets were still up. My grief is not poetic. It is practical. I miss the labor we did together, holding up the roof of a decade. I miss the jokes we told in rooms with floors that squeaked. I miss the certainty that doors would open if we pushed together. But I do not miss the man who looked at my wife like a prize and at me like an obstacle. Friendship requires better math than that. One more thing, and then I will leave this for someone else to use, if they must. If you ever find yourself in a kitchen with your hands on a counter that someone else used while you were gone, do not let your body write the entire next hour. Sit down. Drink water. Count. Start a list. Call a lawyer who explains things like a builder and not like a poet. Freeze the accounts above a number that keeps groceries safe and casinos hungry. Ask the workplace how they handle romance when expense reports are jealous. Keep your child's schedule sacred. Choose sleep over scrolling. Replace the light bulb over the sink. Sweep. Return to your list in the morning. Repeat this until the days become days again instead of explosions. 3 seasons later, I took my son to the lake at dawn. The water looked like a sheet of hammered steel, and the skyline tried to be a mountain range and failed in a way that made me like it more. He asked if I thought everything that happened had made us stronger. I told him strength is less interesting than steadiness. I told him steady holds roofs, while strong starts fights. He nodded and tossed a stone, and it skipped long enough to make the work of talking worth it. We turned and walked home past a bakery that already had the glass fogged. I bought 2 rolls, and we ate them leaning against the front fence, our fingers warm with butter and morning. Sometimes I think of Lena at her gym, and the way she talks to women who want to feel like their bodies will one day forgive them. I think of Mark in a new city trying to remember what loyalty looks like when the room is not cheering. I hope they find versions of themselves that can carry the weight of daylight. I hope I never have to hold that weight for them again. I have my portion. It is enough. In the end, this is what happened. My wife cheated with my best friend. I did not destroy myself to punish them. I took notes. I made calls. I filed papers. I asked for orders that kept the house upright and the bank honest and the child asleep at hours that make school less cruel. I did not shout in restaurants or make strangers judges. I did a slow, hard thing well enough to keep the mirror from laughing at me in the morning. Inside the quiet of that decision, life kept going. That was the whole point. It still is. In the months that followed, I learned to close a day without asking the night to clap. I taught the house my rhythm again. Shirts met steam and lay flat on the back of a chair while the kettle sang, and the window showed a slice of sky that did not need to be beautiful to be enough. Bills got paid on time, and the numbers stood in rows like citizens waiting their turn. Folders clicked into place, and the cabinet stopped pretending to be a forest because order had a voice again. I salted water, let it roll, and thought about coasts I have not seen in years. The thought was kind, not hungry. The microwave glass lost its haze and started telling the truth about the light inside. A new line appeared in the budget with a calm name, and I funded it with sleep. Small mechanics held the world. Tires took air, and the road stopped complaining. Release nights arrived, and I woke before the alarms, because a rested mind does not need sirens. Soap filled its pump, and the sink brightened. A note on the door reminded me of keys, and the morning agreed to start without chaos. Coins gathered in a jar and turned into a ferry to better days whenever a bus ran late or a museum asked for exact change. Stamps waited in a drawer, and letters traveled across town with the same stubborn dignity as a train in winter. Dust surrendered under the bed, and the dishwasher kept time like an old drummer who refuses to show off. Oatmeal beat fury before noon. Socks found their partners. The stairs hummed after the vacuum passed, and the hard drive copied itself to a friend, so the future would not need to beg the past for favors. I pulled weeds and the garden forgave my absence. Paint covered a wall that remembered a careless bag, and the room reset. Screws sorted into jars became a promise kept for repairs I had been postponing. The door learned to swing without complaint, and the table found steadiness. A dental visit pushed headaches out of the calendar. Soup simmered on nights when work asked for a longer shift, and patience arrived with a spoon. Water at 9 made mornings reasonable. Lists for the market stayed honest, and I returned with what I had promised. A flashlight lived in the drawer where panic used to sleep. Drawers stopped fraying at the edge. Pillows took winter sun and brought back sleep that told the truth. I carried a neighbor package to the right porch and felt like a citizen again. The furnace breathed sweeter after a filter change, and the rug shook itself awake on the porch like a dog after rain. Chains learned oil, and rides ran true. The router found its balance, and meetings stopped stuttering. Cables curled under Velcro instead of underfoot. Batteries waited patient in a box, and the remote stopped sulking. The garage floor showed its face after a long sweep, and a missing hex key returned like a friend who had learned manners. Boxes broke down, and the trash could breathe. Mittens multiplied because winter steals. A spare key lived with a neighbor, and the street nodded at the idea of community. I taught my son the knot a tie asks for, and the mirror agreed. I counted to 10 and saved a friendship that deserved rescue. A pan took seasoning, and eggs finally behaved. I wrote thanks to the clerk who had rescued me from a form with too many lines. Errands traveled easier in one bag. Old voicemails went silent, a lamp unplugged, and daylight still made the room visible. A window opened, and the city proved itself alive without trying. I stretched, and patience stretched with me. A sticky note kept perspective alive after long meetings tried to bury it. I said no to plans that bully bedtimes. I let a grudge fall asleep, and I took a nap. Change fed a stranger meter, and I walked away wealthier. A small shelf rose on fresh brackets, and no one needed to see it but us. A hinge took a lost screw, and the door treated us better. New recipes failed with dignity, and then worked the second time. A plant forgave me and offered green. Dates on jars reminded me that care respects the future. Boots stored clean returned in spring without accusations. My voice softened with my son, and his answers brightened. I taught him how to shake hands and how to let go at the right time. I apologized when I was wrong and gained ground I could stand on. Glass went to the bin that turned shards into second chances. Pages replaced scrolling. Gratitude lists stalled because dinner was ready, and that was its own answer. An umbrella waited where it should. The bus schedule learned my name, and the car stopped pretending to be a throne. A small battery pack lived in my bag, and the day lost leverage. A book I loved at 17 survived a reread with grace. Laptops closed at a sane hour, and evening returned to being evening. Meals planned on Sunday took the teeth out of Monday. Red lights became pauses instead of punishments, and I arrived the man who had left. Water tasted better after a filter remembered its purpose. My son and I folded a sheet without fighting the corners, and we laughed at our work. Snacks in meetings shortened tempers. Cash in a pocket became quiet kindness. A calendar with boxes big enough for real life made the judge in my head go home early. The radiator preached to us in January, and we said amen by wearing socks. I learned my neighbors' names and used them. The stove closed every night, with no record of mistakes. The toaster stopped burning mornings. Clothes waited for dawn on the chair, and breakfast stopped racing the clock. A soft light in the hallway made midnight gentler. A coat without a future warmed someone else. Bandages and gauze stacked in a tin-taut hope. I wrote a note to the man I intend to be and tucked it with the files. I let a friend talk without fixing him, and he left lighter. The phone slept in a drawer. The room spoke. After vacuuming, I told myself good job and meant it. Rug pads kept us from skidding into corners. Gratitude mapped a way out of trouble. Leftovers respected tomorrow. A walk replaced a stew of thoughts. The toolbox stayed honest and the house grew kinder. Fresh air beat any perfume. Bowls stacked correctly, and the cabinet answered with quiet. The bed stood neat each morning, and the day saluted. I forgave the man I had been on days when I did not know how. None of this is spectacle. It is recovery disguised as routine. It is the slow repair of a life that could have gone loud and chose to go true. My son sleeps on time. The roof holds. The mirror does not laugh. The past stays in a folder, and the folder stays closed. Chicago wind still pushes snow into ragged ramps, and on certain nights the streetlights make it glitter as if the city wants to be beautiful for someone who will thank it. I am that someone again. I keep going.